All right, today is Thursday, the 3rd of March. For each class today, I should be able to lecture in the first hour, and the second hour will be lab. So in this class, in the Android class, and in the Swift class, all right, as far as I can tell. I want to go and do about 2 or 3 things in here today. First, I want to go over chapters 14 and 15. Second, I want to give you your next assignment. And I did talk today about doing that form validation. We're going to do that on Tuesday of next week. All right? So we'll talk about what we're going to do between now and the break also. So again, after today, we're finished with part 3 of the book, Building Richly Interactive Websites. So we've done 12 and 13 already. We're going to do now 14, Creating Advanced Web Page Elements in jQuery, and 15, Accessing Server-Side Data via JavaScript and jQuery Ajax. Now, as always, just so you know, there is a folder out there under the in-class folder for today. And if you look up on the screen here, you don't have to worry about copying this over now. You can do it later, okay? It's not going anywhere. So here's some stuff from Chapter 14. And they talk in here about how to build a slideshow. And I've also incorporated in here on how to build a lightbox. We'll talk about that in a bit. Chapter 15 is all on Ajax, and I actually want to grab 2 articles that are in there on that. That's this one, and I don't remember what the other one was called. I think it's that one. That is it. Good. So we'll go over those. Also, I put this out there. This is not a blast from the past exactly, but if you look up on the screen, this is that website I showed you at the beginning of the semester. The reason that it's up there again and the reason that I recopied it, this is not exactly a slider, but you see what's going on here in that we've got images that are going across the screen. All right. Also, if you look here, if you've never seen this before, this is basically an example of a light box where I can click here. All right, and if I want to, I can go and work all the way through there. All right, I'm going to ask that you incorporate both of those into your next assignment. All right, so we'll talk about that in just a bit. But let's just jump into Chapter 14. Again, as you can see, creating advanced web page elements in jQuery. So what's discussed in here are image galleries. Next, they go into what I like to call, and you may or may not agree with this, but the second thing that's in here more or less is kind of an interactive table. You may or may not remember this from the 161 class, the ASP.NET class, when we created a table and we were bringing in database data. And at the top of the table were all the different field names. And if you clicked on any one of those field names, it sorted it by that column. And if you double-clicked on it, it sorted it in descending order. We're going to kind of see the same thing in here. All right? These 2 things I'm going to ask you to incorporate, these 3 things, into your next assignment. All right? Then they talk about tree views. I didn't know how that fit really with this Uber assignment, so I'm not going to make you do anything with that. The custom dialog is kind of neat because, again, it really shows the interactivity that you can have when you work with a website. And then at the end, they talk about creating visual elements using basic HTML and jQuery, so we'll talk about that. Finally, they talk about how to use jQuery to create dynamic sparklines. They actually create a graphic equalizer in this chapter, and they show you what it looks like. Again, I didn't know where that exactly belonged in a BTC Uber site, so I'm not going to give you anything to do on it. All right. So again, as they mentioned, what they talk about in here are some more advanced page elements. And again, they start with the image gallery. And again, different people learn in different ways. You all know this. But some people are very visually oriented. And it's having something visual is a good way to get and ideally keep a user's attention. Maybe you've gone out to a website that all it is just text, all right? And after a while, it's like, where was I again in this article? But when you break it up and you put some graphics in there, and again, this example I showed you, this isn't by no means a great example, all right? but you can see there are a lot of graphics in there. And it makes it much easier as you're working your way across here, all right, to kind of break up everything that's in here. I think it reads a little better, it flows a little bit better. Again, you may or may not agree with that. So they say the most effective method for implementing an image gallery is to create a slider that contains thumbnails with arrows that slide through until you find and click the desired thumbnail. So the first example that they put in here is right here. You probably have seen stuff like this before. You may have created something like this before. All right. So there's, in here at least, it looks like there's about 4 different images. The one that's highlighted is you get a nice crisp image, etc. And if you click on it, instead of showing the thumbnail up here, it shows the thing in full size. Now, I'm going to take for granted that possibly one or more of you have never done that before. All right. So I went outside or went and looked at some articles, and I found this one, how to make a slider. And it's pretty darn basic, to be honest with you. That isn't it, but hopefully it'll come up. All right, I'll close that one. Now I'll see if I can make it come up. There it is. How to make a slider, and it shows you the HTML, and it shows you the CSS, and it shows you the JavaScript that you can use. And if you do that, and you run it across the screen, you get this, because this is 1.ping, so that's the first image. And if you click the next button, you get this. And if you click the next button, you get this. And if you click the next button, you get this. So it's pretty basic, but again, if you've had little to no experience doing this, ideally at least, it should at least start you in the right direction, all right? One of the people in the class yesterday, we were talking a little bit after class, and one of the things that I mentioned, and I ended up mentioning actually, was during break, I ended up mentioning it to the whole class, was part of what you're going to be graded on in your next assignment. Okay, this is a site for BTC Uber, right? And so in other words, whatever you put in there for some kind of images, if you've got an image gallery at the top, it should be something that pertains to the site, all right? It might be that you like really neat pictures of little kids playing, playing on playgrounds. So you come up with a really cool slider and it's got little kids playing on playgrounds. What does that have to do with BTC Uber? To me, nothing. All right. So what you actually choose to incorporate in there in an image slider is up to you. But it should be something that pertains, that's relevant to the site itself. All right. And again, some of the other articles that are in here, how to make a slideshow from scratch, how to work with Lightbox, and there's even some code in there, etc. So as mentioned, there is a bunch of examples in there for you to look at when you get some time. And when you look at this, this is all the HTML. There really isn't very much. All right. Here, and it's about 60 lines, so I can't fit it all on a screen at once, but here is the JavaScript. And again, this is stuff you should be able to read in here. Notice they created an array for the images, all right? And then they basically do an append and they throw this stuff out there, all right? Then they've got a timeout in there. Why are they doing that? Because you control the speed at which the images go across the screen, all right? And how they slide. You probably have heard things like this before, but let's assume for a second you've got 4 different images that you have in your gallery. All right, usually what happens is the first one shows, then the second one shows, then the third one shows, then the fourth one shows, then it loops back around to the beginning. And if you put the less than and greater than things on each end, if you're at slide number 1 and you click the less than to go to the previous, you wrap around to the end and you're on 4. If you're on number 4 and you click to the next, you wrap around to number 1. Does all that make sense? All right. So they give you an example that you can use if you're so inclined in here, and they give you the CSS. All right. So next is what I mentioned to you earlier. They talk about tables, and we've talked about tables before. One thing with tables is tables should be used for tabular data. So if you look at the example that they put in here, if you look right here in the example, notice they typed in 5 for the quantity. What that says is show me everything that's in here that has a quantity of 5 or above. Now that should make sense to you. If I get rid of that and I come in here, right there, where it says product, and I type the word sweater, I'm going to get this one, and this one, and this one, and this one, etc. So you are able to do filtering. If I only want to see one record, and I know the ID, I can put that in there. If I want to see anything that's greater than or equal to a certain price, I can do that. So maybe I know that most of my items are between, let's say, $10 and $25. But I want to know the items that are greater than 25 or greater than or equal to. I can type in there 25, and that'll funnel this list out also. All right? And I'm going to ask that you do something like that for the Uber site. My suggestion is that you create some kind of a new page, and you've got some kind of a table in it. You might do, for example, rides. All right, campus that you're going to, time that you're going to have a pickup, number of people that you can put in your vehicle, and the cost or whatever. And if you don't like that, you can make up your own. But again, it should be something that's directly applicable to this website that we're working on. All right. So again, notice there's the HTML. There's not much of it. All right. Here, a little more, about 70 lines. But here, all they're doing is they're filling up the table in there. And then they're providing you the opportunity to sort, and they're providing the opportunity for you in here to filter. So again, that ideally you should be able to look at that, and it should make sense. These examples work. I've got the source code out there on the system. If you want to use those to get yourself started, that's fine. And here is the associated CSS. All right. Next, they talk about tree views. You know what a tree view is. You built tree views in the ASP.NET class. And again, a tree view with the pluses and the minus on it, meaning you can expand or you can collapse. All right, again, I didn't know if that really had a place in the website that we're currently working on. So you can take a look at it, but there's nothing that we have to do for it for our next assignment. The overlay dialogues, this is kind of a neat example. You may or may not agree with what I'm about to say in here, but if you look up on the screen right here, when you click that edit page button right there, this is what comes up. And notice in here, it comes up by default, it says edit page, and it's got 4 option buttons. And by default, it says title here, and it says some content here. Then the user came up and changed the title from title to new title, removed option 1 and option 4, and for content, put in new content, for example, and clicked update. And you notice how that converted to this. All right, again, I wasn't sure how that exactly would apply to the site we're working on. But if you want to try something like that, go for it. That's fine. Again, then they gave this graphic equalizer, so they create that. And there's not really a song playing, so they basically use a random numbers to make this thing jump up and down. Okay? Same thing with the Sparkline graphics. I thought of having you do something like this, where you would create something and you'd kind of have like a pulse graph like this that would show the times of the day when your Uber was most being used. But I didn't know if that would be actually good or bad, so I just left it off. All right, but again, take a look at it. If it's something you're interested in putting in there, by all means do that. All right. So, Chapter 15, accessing server-side data via JavaScript and jQuery Ajax requests. As I mentioned, I wanted to show you a couple articles that were in here, and I wanted to do those first. This is a really good article for a couple reasons. First of all, it's very short. It's 3 pages long. All right. You can't really explain somebody a technology in 3 pages, but the author does a pretty good job of this. We've talked about Ajax before, asynchronous JavaScript and XML. One of the things that I've said about this is the fact that the Ajax today, more than not, is considered to just be an acronym that doesn't have any exact meaning. It really doesn't stand anymore for asynchronous JavaScript and XML, because much of the Ajax work that's being done today, rather than being done in XML, is being done using JSON or JavaScript object notation. That said, this is a good start or beginning article. So when we look at that in here, Ajax is not a programming language or tool, but a concept. What it is it's a way for the client to send a message to the server to say only update the amount of the page that needs to be updated. For example, this is to me the most relevant example I can think of. Let's suppose that you've got a form, all right, an HTML form that you've created. And you fill it all out, but then you realize after you filled it out and submit it and everything, you never changed the state. And instead of saying, please select the state, it just, by default, it was Alabama. So as far as they're concerned, when you registered or whatever, you're in Janesville, Alabama, okay, instead of Janesville, Wisconsin. So you bring that back up again, and you change the state, and you change it from Alabama, AL, to Wisconsin, WI. Well, the idea is, why should you have to write back that whole thing? Why should you have to, do that? Why can't you only show what's changed? All right? And that's the idea basically behind Ajax. And you've seen stuff like this, something as simple as this. If I come in here and so I go into Google and I type in A. Well, notice what happens. As soon as I put a J in there, all right? But what if I put in here, if I put in A, then I put a P for Apple. You can see how it changes. This is Google Suggest. And it changes based on what your inputs are. So it's either going to keep showing stuff in here, but notice I've got Apple, etc. So what if I put an API space? You can see how it changes when I do this. All right. Another good one that usually is used with this, and one that people can usually identify with, is Google Maps. And you've all done that where you've gone out to Google Maps. You probably have, where you zoom in and you zoom out type of an idea. All right. So again, what this article says is it's a client-side tool that communicates to and from a server or database without the need for a postback. Talked about that last semester. 4 benefits of Ajax are mentioned here. The first is it allows callbacks. We've already been looking at callbacks, all right, in the guise of using them with jQuery, where you've got a function, and a function may take several parameters. The last of those parameters may be a callback function. All right, so when that function is done executing, it may immediately call another function. You can make asynchronous calls. We've talked about this before. In an ideal world, when 2 people are trying to communicate, they're communicating synchronously. In other words, if I'm talking to Mike, I'm going to say something, he's going to listen. When I get done talking, he's going to say something, and I'm going to listen. But in other words, I have to sit there and do something and stop before he can start. Well, with stuff being asynchronous, I can start talking, and he can kind of just cue it up or whatever, and he can start talking back before I'm done. So you don't have to wait, all right, for something to finish before you can start something else. It's user-friendly. As it says, because the postback is being eliminated, it's going to be more responsive, it's going to be faster. And along with that being, that comes with the increased speed, all right? And people want that. So they mention this. Ajax callbacks can be done by instantiating an XML HTTP request object. If you never heard the story of this, several years ago, and way, many versions ago, it was like IE4 or IE5, something like that. Microsoft created this XML HTTP object, but never really did a lot with it. Then, and this is the other article that's in here, Jesse James Garrett, who was kind of one of the people at the forefront of Ajax, came in and said, we really could use this XML HTTP request object to allow us to communicate between the client and server. And that's what he did. So he mentions in here that it's not a technology, it's a combination of technologies. And he talks about them right there. And he says, here's the classic web model where you type in a URL, you hit enter, you have to wait while the server goes and finds that page, translates it into the HTML your browser can understand, sends it back to you. All right. Whereas again with Ajax, since you're only working with a partial page refresh, the same thing is happening, but it can happen much faster. And that's what he talks about in here. And that's how he says it's different. And there's a little bit more pictures. And who's using Ajax? Again, the idea is who's not. All right. And the last couple pages in here, he's got some Q&A stuff in here. All right. With him, again, being one of the people at the forefront, people wanted to get his opinion on different things. All right. But he was one of the first to realize that this XML HTTP request object could be used to establish a communication mechanism between the client and the server. All right. Again, typically or originally meant asynchronous JavaScript and XML. Today, in many ways, JSON is being used more than XML. That doesn't mean that XML is going away or it's gone away. It's still used by a lot of companies, but there are a lot of people who like using JSON as opposed to XML for two reasons. One, XML is kind of verbose. It's got tags for virtually everything. And two, JSON is looks more like JavaScript does. All right. So as it says, where should Ajax be used? Ajax should be used anywhere in an application where small amounts of information could be saved or retrieved from the server without having to post back the entire page. And I gave you a couple of examples already. All right. So with that said, let's take a look at what's in the chapter here. Again, you'll have no homework from this particular part. All right. But using Ajax requests to load data into page elements, sending Ajax get and post requests, serializing parameters for get and post requests, handling JSON and XML data in the web server Ajax response, and implementing Ajax event handlers. Not every example that was in this chapter worked when I tried to run them, and I'll show you what I mean when we get to that point. They mention that Ajax can be daunting because it's a different way of looking at things. It's like any new technology, all right? So it says clarifying Ajax versus page requests. It's what I mentioned to you before. It's the idea of basically making a request and having a whole new page presented to you, as opposed to just what's changed on the page that you're looking at. And that's what they talk about here. They show the traditional model here, and they show the Ajax request model here. In order to do it, you have to have some kind of server-side vehicle to use. All right? So when we get into talking about Angular, we'll see if there's something possibly we can do with this. All right? And as you probably guess, and I actually broke this down. So if I go out to here, let's put this in here, W3 Schools, Ajax tutorial, okay? This isn't bad. I started going through it, and I grabbed everything that was in here, all of these, and threw them all into a document. It's one of those Chapter 15 documents. It's called Ajax tutorial. If that's too much or you don't really like it, what they do is most of these have one or more examples in there. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 sections. And if you go down to the bottom here where it says Ajax examples, those are all the examples that are in the things up above. Those are just the examples. So I put that page out there too. All right. And they give examples of using it in PHP, in ASP file, using it basically almost with just JavaScript, etc., and using it with database and with XML. The idea, again, with asynchronous communication, It's mentioned again there. I've already talked to you about it. All right. Understanding cross-domain requests. Notice what it says here. Cross-domain requests occur when you send Ajax requests to separate servers from different domains. By default, you're not allowed to do that. But what if you had to? All right. Well, as always, there's a workaround for it. Okay, you may or may not remember this because we didn't spend very much time on it, but when we were in the ASP.NET class, we looked a little bit at the Ajax controls. All right, and if you put a script manager and if you put an Ajax script manager in your master page, you can't put any of those in any other page. All right, there's just one script manager. So what do you do if you want different ones? You create what's called a proxy manager. And if you don't know what a proxy is, it's like let's suppose today let's say I'm a shareholder in Apple and I've got some shares, okay? And they're having a meeting today where they're voting on something. And I can't make the meeting. But I know Ben's going, so I give Ben my proxy. So he has the ability to vote for me. All right, that kind of an idea. So you can get around this by basically using proxies. Right. Get versus post. Again, don't mean to keep mentioning him, but Ben was in here a little earlier today. We were talking about this, and I mentioned to him that I find this interesting. By and large, over the years, what people tend to say to me is the class they like the most in their first year is the 147 class, the MySQL class. Makes the most sense to them, probably the easiest, all right? And, it's not a bad class. You can do a lot of it on your own. It's understandable, etc. Well, we've got a couple people who are first-year people who just hate it. They're saying it makes no sense to them. You weren't here yesterday, and you would have really heard it yesterday. Really? Yeah, yesterday was the worst day, all right? That we had people just basically going nuts about it, all right? And then we went over this chapter. So I kept making database references. And I said, to me, when you look at get versus post, if you're doing a get, you're not changing data. You're displaying data. Kind of sounds like a select statement, doesn't it? All right. When you use a post, you have at least the ability to change data. Sounds more like an insert or an update or a delete to me. All right. And to me, that's a good way of looking at them. Understanding different response data types. All right, again, you can have binary files. You can get the information back as regular text files, .txt files, XML files, and JSON files. Most of the time, people choose XML or JSON because there are pre-written tools that allow you to take that output and format it in such a way that it's easier to work with. All right. As far as implementing Ajax from JavaScript, as it says, to implement an Ajax request in JavaScript, you need to access a new window.xml HTTP request object. And here's some of the stuff that you can do with it. Now, we don't do nearly the work in here probably that we should do, but when you look at what's in here on the screen in blue, when you're working with this request objects, there's different states that it can be in. And typically what you'll want is you want it to be in the ready state. So it's there and it's able to start doing its thing. Plus, when you do that and you make an HTTP request, you're going to get a response back. And that response will have a number associated with it. I would guess that everybody in this room at one time or another, you've all gone out to a website where you either type something in or you click a link or whatever, and it comes back and it says 404 error, page not found. That's an HTTP response type that you're getting. All right, that's in the 400 levels. The 200 mean good, everything's cool. Typically 100 or 300 or 400 mean there's some kind of a problem or something you at least have to be aware of. All right. jQuery has its own different methods that you can work with. Okay, as it says, it provides simple to use wrapper methods. So it's got load, get this, get that, etc. It also has, I'll jump back in just a second, but it also has, come on. a bunch of global event handlers, and you notice that all of them start with .ajax. So if we look quickly at a couple of the examples that are in this chapter, this one, what is supposed to happen here is if you take your mouse and you put it over any of these four things, the thing you put your mouse over is supposed to turn yellow. And if you click on it, the associated text is supposed to appear in here. Okay? And if you say, I don't get it, I think you do. Not too many years ago, maybe before Mike was a student here, I don't know. But it was very popular to use frames on web pages. And during that time, one of the things I had students do was they literally made a coloring book of animals. So over here, they had the letters A through Z, and these were all hyperlinks. And if they clicked the A, then over here would come up a picture of an alligator. B, a picture of a bear would come up, etc. Get the idea? In fact, this stuff is still used today. All right, but today it's called master detail types of pages. So it's still being used. All right. The next example that they had here, handling the Ajax responses, this one it says, in this example, you get a chance to implement done, fail, and always Ajax event handlers on a basic jQuery GET request. So I didn't read this. I didn't have my book, and I didn't have this up. So I kept putting in my name, but I put in, and then when I looked at it later and I finally found it, oh, I thought I spelled Lancelot wrong. I thought it was Lancelot. So every time I put something in here, I put, even when I spell Lancelot, but I put it, spelled it wrong, or I put my name, and I did guess blue, it still came up every time and said, you may not pass. But the idea is if you put in Lancelot with two A's, blue, and you click request, you get may pass. So the idea is all they're trying to show here, you can call it kind of a goofy, it's not even really a login page, right? Because it's not sending you anywhere, but it's showing you what, whether you were successful or unsuccessful. And regardless, then it came back and it said, as long as you put something in each one of those boxes, didn't matter what it was, it came back and said questions answered. The next thing, as it says, this was another work with another, like a picture setup. And what it did was it took the information and it wrote it out to JSON. So if you ever wondered what JSON looks like, that's it right here. Doesn't look that different from when a week or so ago or 2 weeks ago when we looked at that HTML game, Bernie's Race for the White House, and we were creating the Hillary object. That stuff kind of looked like this. With this, again, the idea is when you click on different things here, you get a different image up. And again, they're writing it out. They're basically setting it up as JSON. So when you look at this, what do you have here? Well, this is an object. This entire thing, the object starts here and it ends here. And inside of that object, that's called trips, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 different types of objects. Each object has an ID, a title, a location, some kind of a date, some kind of a number of days with it, an image, and a rating. So again, this could be, for example, something that was set up for a travel agency. And if the travel agency had literally scores of places it went to, you would just be making several of these in it. And again, I already mentioned this as far as a little bit of advanced jQuery Ajax. As it says right here, the concepts covered thus far should take care of most of your needs, but they don't show the full power of jQuery, the jQuery Ajax interface. So they mention in here different things that you can do with Ajax using jQuery. All right. And notice what all of these things in here say. Registers, registers, registers. So for instance, the Ajax error with a function in there. So if you try to do an Ajax operation and it fails, all right, by default, meaning unless you tell it otherwise, the program's just going to poop out. But you can put in your own error handler in there, all right, to maybe go off to an error page or to do something else. And then finally, as it says here, all Ajax request wrapper methods we worked with so far in this lesson are handled. It says through the .ajax URL, etc. It says this interface is a bit more difficult to use, but it gives you more flexibility. The Ajax method is called in the same way that get and post are. However, the arguments are changed. And these are the different settings that you can work with in here. I hope we can come back and revisit this when we get into the Angular part. All right? A little bit more, and that's it for that chapter. So what I'm going to do, and I've got a copy of this for everyone, is this is your next homework. Should have enough. I did 8. I don't think there's 8 of you in here. So as it says up on the screen, for this assignment you will continue to add to and upgrade the BTC Uber website that we worked on in part 1. So from chapter 12, I want you to add some kind of jQuery animation. And again, what I'm looking for in here, I want to make sure people understand this. What I'm looking for in here is quality, not so much quantity. You're not going to impress me by putting in every single one of the things that's in blue up there. All right? All that's going to do is it's just going to kind of mess up the site if you do a slide and a fade and you do a hide, etc. But do some animation, and do some animation that would make some sense for the site. From chapter 13, spruce up the jQuery BTC Uber web form, the last one, the jQuery one. You can do all 3 if you want to, but this is the only one you're going to have to you're going to have to change. You want to make sure that each form element has a name property and an ID property. You want to go in and try to add some intelligent flow control. If you don't remember what that is, that basically says that it's as easy as possible for a person to iterate their way through a form. And on the off chance they make a mistake, you find a way to let them know right away. For instance, BTC ID number. It's got to be 9 and it's got to be digits. All right? So one way that you could do that to make it a little bit more intelligent is if it's non-numeric, or if they put in too many or too few digits, you could keep them right in that particular form element and maybe change the color, put like a red glow around it, or do whatever. Does that make sense?
It's worse than being numeric. It's numeric with 3 leading zeros.
Yes, I know that. But I just figured that was actually too much, but you are right. All right. So as it says, I want you to use this in conjunction with that jQuery form validation plugin. So if you didn't do that for assignment 1, do it now. I had at least one person, it was not in this class, it was in the other class, that did the HTML5 form validation and took their form when they got it done and copied it to javascript.html and jQuery.html and then didn't change it. So they did the HTML5 for all 3 of them. It's not what you were asked to do. All right, some of you, though, either didn't totally do it, or maybe didn't complete it, or didn't do the jQuery form validation plugin. Again, I will show you that on Tuesday of next week. All right? If you want, you can add this to the other 2 forms. You do not have to. From chapter 14, again, I'd like you to add an image gallery to your main page. As it says, how you do it is up to you. The one that's shown in our book, remember, has got 4 images in it, and they run along the top, and when you click on any one of the images, they're more thumbnail size, a big thing pops up on the screen. That may or may not be what you want to do. You may just want to have a bunch of images that scroll across the screen and don't do anything. Or you might want them to do something. All right? Again, also upgrade the website to use a lightbox. And as an example of how that could be done. And he's not here, and I'm not picking on him anyway, because it was kind of cool what he did. What Robert did, Robert, who's usually sits over here, what he did for his, where here I've got, for example, in fact, my example, the one that we're going to work with next week, but it's not totally finished yet, because this is mine. I didn't do a lot of work on mine, but there's the home page, there's the about page, there's my form, and I just have the same form for all of them. So whether it's HTML, whether it's JavaScript, or whether it's jQuery, the form looks the same every time, okay? What he did, though, was instead of having home, about, and like this, he had home, he had about, and then he had a thing here that said registration. And if you click registration, what came up when you click registration was something like this. In other words, he had the lightbox right there, and he programmed it so if you click the one that says HTML5, it brought up that form. If you click the one that said JavaScript, it brought up that form. If you click the one that said jQuery, it brought up that form. Does that make sense? That actually makes a lot of sense to me, and that's more along the lines of the thing I thought you would do. All right. Again, as I mentioned, add a new web page with what I called an interactive table. I gave you an example. You don't have to use this one. If you want to use your own setup for this, however, you can do that. I said as an example, it could be a thing on different pickup and drop-off times, where you put the campuses in there and you put different times in there, etc. All right. Nothing from Chapter 15. Again, ideally, we'll take a look at that and revisit that a little bit later in the semester. As it says here, as always, ask if you have questions. Next week, Tuesday, the 8th, Thursday, the 10th, which is a week from today, will both be lab. But what I'm going to do during at least the first part of class on Tuesday is to go over and show you how you would validate all three of those forms. All right? What many people did, and I don't know how many of you in here did, but what many people did in the first year people for the JavaScript, I don't know if you remember, I'm not going to bring it up, but the instructions from the first assignment said that if something was left blank or was the wrong format, it said you were supposed to put a message to the side that was in red. But what a lot of people did with the JavaScript stuff is if something was wrong, they just brought up an alert box. You weren't asked to do that. So I'm going to do it and follow the steps that are in the actual first homework assignment. All right. So, and we'll begin our discussion of part 4, which is chapters 16 to 19 on Tuesday, March 15th. So we're going to go over 16 and 17 on Tuesday, 18 and 19 on Thursday. I will give you your next assignment. That won't be due till right around the end of April. You'll notice that this one's due the 3rd, but again, feel free to get it done before that. I said this before. I don't want to hear from anybody. Jeff, you really screwed up my break because I had to work on your frickin' homework all the break. Then do it beforehand or do it after. All right? Any questions on anything we went over today? Either chapter 14, chapter 15, the homework, or what we'll be doing next week for the next 2 weeks. All right? Then I'm finished. The rest of this period is lab. And again, what I'm going to do during Android, all right, last night I was up, I had to spend almost a half an hour with Adrian this morning. I found out one of the things that you don't do with a virtual desktop. All right, at home, I had a flash drive, just one of my flash drives. And I didn't realize it, but somehow I have literally maxed out on the H drive. Mine was at a gig. You guys get 500 meg, I get a gig. I was at over a gig. It wouldn't even let me create a project on the H drive. It wouldn't let me do anything. So I started grabbing stuff from the H drive and I started putting it on a flash drive. Also, I noticed, and I had almost no room on my virtual desktop. So while I was doing that, I was also grabbing things from there and throwing it on the flash drive. Before I realized that I had 9 different windows open where I was moving stuff over, and my system just basically froze. All right, which wasn't a good thing. And then this morning, I just thought I'm going to leave it and I'll fix it this morning when I get up. Well, it was still doing a couple of those transfers from one of and the flash drive fell out. Yeah. So so what was bad was I got in here this morning and I brought the virtual desktop. It was just blue. I had nothing but a blue screen. And it took Adrian about 15 minutes, but he was able to go and reboot it, bring it back up again, etc. So I had to do the stuff over here where it worked a lot faster. So the reason I'm telling you that is while I was cleaning stuff out, unbeknownst to me, all right, I cleaned out, on here, I cleaned out all my Android stuff. So I've got to go back right now and rebuild that BMI thing. And I'm going to do that, okay? And so between now and 1 o'clock, that's my challenge. All right, that's it then.